Welcome to a GoToGroup presentation.
Okay, so click on User Browser, and now you can see the list of users within JIRA. Typically, JIRA will store the user IDs, passwords, and groups they belong to within JIRA. Later in the class, we'll talk about how you can use LDAP or Active Directory connected to JIRA to authenticate your users. But right now, we're just going to talk about your users and how you configure a user. Let's first create a new user. Clicking on the Add User link. You can create a user name and create a password. Type your password in again. Type in their full name and type in your email address. Why is that email address important? Remember, we talked about notification schemes. So if you've been assigned an issue, when that issue is assigned to you, you will receive an email. Or maybe you created an issue, and every time the issue changes, you'll be sent an email. Okay, this next box, by default, it's clicked. And if you click this, it'll send the email to the user you just created with their login information. Of course, if you're using LDAP for authentication, there's no reason to do that since they already know their domain login. Now that you've added all the fields for a new user, click Create, and it actually creates the users. You'll notice that by default, on the screen, you can see that the group JIRA users this user belongs to. And JIRA users is a very important group. If you don't belong to the JIRA users group, this user cannot log into JIRA, which is good. It's one way of disabling user IDs. Maybe a user that no longer works for the company. You can turn off their login, but you can still see the history of maybe what issues they've worked on. You don't have to delete the user, just remove them from the JIRA users group. Now, the importance of groups within JIRA is that this is how permissions are assigned to a group of users, a class of users. So you might have a group of users called developers or testers. All the people in that group would have common permissions. So maybe a developer can work on an issue, a tester could mark the issue as resolved, and maybe only the project lead could actually close the issue. And maybe an administrator can only delete the issue. So as you can see, the permission scheme is rather flexible within JIRA. So now that we've created this new user, let's add them to a group. So click on Edit Groups, and on the left, you'll see all of the groups defined within your system. You'll see by default, you get some groups like JIRA Administrator or JIRA Developers. JIRA Administrators who were logged in right now, you're able to perform the administrative functions. JIRA Developers are typically given the permissions to be able to work on an issue. So let's say this user is going to be a JIRA developer. Okay, returning back to the view of the user. In addition to that, a user also has a public profile. So when a user logs in the first time, they might want to look at what their profile is set to, what projects they're on, what issues have been assigned to them. That's over on the right side. The user profile is not real useful, but you can add in some additional fields if you would like. There's something else called properties, and properties is not something that's typically used. It could be used by some custom programming. For example, you might have a special attribute assigned to some users, and you could use these properties within your programming. We'll talk more about custom programming, plugin development, and specifically custom fields later on in the class. We talked about groups and how groups relate to permissions for users within working on issues. And there's a similar attribute called project roles. Roles and groups are very similar. The big difference is that groups are created by JIRA administrators. Users are added to groups by JIRA administrators, whereas roles can be administered by a project manager or project lead. So you don't need to have the JIRA administrator assign permissions to the developers on your project if you use project roles. We'll talk about project roles further when we start looking at permission schemes, but this is an example. If you click on Edit Details, this is the information that you entered when you created the new user. And here you can change that information if you would like. And finally, if you're not using LDAP, you want to set the password of the user. This allows you to change that password. If you're using LDAP, you never want to use JIRA's password facility. Always use your LDAP or Active Directory Administration tools. And this last link is how you would actually physically delete the user from JIRA. So that ends the first session of our JIRA administration training. The next session we're going to talk about workflows. We're going to create some sample workflows. And that's really the main thrust of this administration training.
This was a Go-To Group presentation. Thank you for watching.